The Navy training ground was alive before dawn, as it always was. The sky was still half asleep, painted in bruised shades of gray and blue, but the base was already awake with the sound of boots striking concrete, the echo of shouted orders, and the metallic clang of gear being hauled across gravel. The air tasted of oil, steel, and salt water, drifting in from the coast. For the men standing in line, it was a familiar rhythm, one they had repeated so many times that the discomfort had hardened into ritual. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were SEALs, or at least SEALs in training, warriors forged through pain, stripped of weakness, and bonded by a brotherhood that few in the world could even dream of entering. Each one had scars hidden beneath their sleeves, memories of grueling days in the surf, endless runs across sand with logs on their shoulders, or nights spent shivering in black water while instructors barked reminders that not everyone made it through. Here, in this line, there was no room for softness. Every man carried himself with the pride of one who had already survived the kind of trials that chewed others up and spit them out. So when she walked in, she didn't just enter a room. She ruptured the air. Her arrival was silent, but the ripple was instant. Boots tapped slower. A conversation died mid-sentence. Heads tilted, eyes narrowed. There was no mistaking it. She was not supposed to belong here. Her steps were measured, steady, each one carrying the calm of someone unfazed by the weight of stairs drilling into her back. She wore the same uniform they did Navy fatigues pressed crisp, boots laced tight, but there was one detail that drew every ounce of attention. Lipstick. A faint shade of red, subtle but deliberate, curved along her lips like an act of rebellion. It wasn't smudged or careless. It was perfect, polished. That single detail struck harder than any shouted insult could have. Lipstick didn't belong here. Lipstick was softness, vulnerability, vanity. And yet, there it was, painted defiantly on a face that gave away nothing else. One of the SEALs let out a sharp breath that might have been a laugh. Another nudged his teammate with the kind of grin reserved for locker room humor. The atmosphere shifted, charged with a mocking amusement that simmered beneath the surface. "Wrong line," someone muttered, just loud enough to carry. A few chuckled, not cruelly, not yet. But the undercurrent was clear. She was out of place. She didn't flinch, not a twitch. Her eyes, steady, dark, unreadable, remained fixed on the space ahead of her, as if she hadn't heard a word. She adjusted her stance, folding her hands neatly behind her back, her posture straight, but not stiff. There was no attempt to shrink under the weight of their judgment. There was no attempt to fight it either. She simply stood, calm and unshaken, the lipstick on her lips the only rebellion against conformity. For the men, the silence was worse than any argument she could have offered. It unsettled them. If she had snapped back, if she had defended herself, they could have dismissed her with a laugh. But she didn't. She let their whispers hang in the air like smoke, choosing not to acknowledge them. And in doing so, she forced them to acknowledge her presence. One of the older SEALs, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his temple, studied her more carefully. His smirk was slower, more cautious. There was something in her stance that didn't fit the narrative of weakness. Confidence, yes, but not the kind that swaggered or demanded attention. It was the quieter kind, the kind born of knowing something. Others didn't. The minutes stretched, and the mocking undertones dulled into a more uncomfortable silence. Even those who still grinned found their laughter faltering when her composure didn't crack. A subtle shift was happening, though none of them admitted it yet. It wasn't the lipstick anymore that bothered them. It was the audacity, the unspoken challenge in her silence. Still, no one knew her name. No one knew her story. And in this world, stories mattered more than appearances. The line moved forward slowly, boots shuffling, orders being called, paperwork being checked. She waited, patient as a stone. The seals watched her out of the corners of their eyes, whispering again, but softer this time. They wanted to dismiss her, to laugh her off, but something about her stillness made that harder than they expected. Finally, one of them noticed it. A younger seal, his arms crossed over his chest, leaned just slightly to get a better look. His eyes narrowed. His grin slipped. He blinked once, then again, making sure he wasn't misreading it. The patch. It was small, unassuming, stitched neatly to the sleeve of her uniform. But the words embroidered, there carried a weight none of them could ignore. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, he nudged the man beside him. "Look," he whispered. The man turned, followed his gaze, and froze. His smirk died instantly. One by one, their eyes traveled to the patch. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. The silence deepened, but now it wasn't mocking. It was heavy, sharp, filled with a recognition they hadn't expected. The patch read, "Elite Marksman." It wasn't a vanity badge. It wasn't a hollow decoration. It was a designation that came only with pain, practice, and the kind of mastery that most never achieved. To wear it meant more than accuracy. It meant precision under pressure, consistency under chaos. It meant that when the world burned, this person could remain steady enough to hit the target every time. The lipstick didn't matter anymore. Every SEAL in that line knew exactly what it took to earn that patch. They knew the training, the endless drills, the sleepless nights at the range. They knew the weight of the weapon in your hands when it wasn't just practice anymore. When real lives depended on the steadiness of your breath and the control of your trigger finger. They knew because most of them hadn't earned it. A quiet, unspoken shift spread through the group. The mocking grins were gone. In their place came a different kind of silence, one that tasted like respect, reluctant but undeniable. She didn't turn to face them. She didn't acknowledge the change. She didn't need to. She had walked in with lipstick, and they had seen weakness. She had stood silently, and they had seen defiance. But with a single patch, without a word, she had reminded them that strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits in silence, confident that recognition will come on its own. And it had. By the time the line moved again, the SEALs were no longer looking at her as an outsider. They were looking at her as something else entirely, someone who carried a title that demanded respect, whether they liked it or not. The lipstick hadn't made her weaker. It had made her unforgettable. The silence that followed the patch's discovery was almost worse than the laughter that had preceded it. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the weight of reassessment, the invisible shift in the room as hardened men recalibrated what they thought they knew. Still, silence never lasted long among SEALs. Doubt, however, had a way of lingering, curling into whispers and side glances that spoke louder than any open confrontation. One of the younger recruits broke it first. He leaned toward the man beside him, voice low enough to avoid the woman's ear, but not low enough to escape others in the line. "Could have been handed to her," he muttered. The man he spoke to gave a quick shrug, but didn't answer. It was an old refrain, one that surfaced whenever someone unexpected wore a title others had fought to earn. Maybe she got lucky. Maybe. The instructors bent the rules. Maybe, just maybe, the patch didn't mean what it used to. The words hung there, infecting the air. Another man snorted softly. Paper badge. Probably good at the range, but out there? He jerked his chin toward the open sky, the invisible battlefield that stretched across oceans and deserts. Different. Story. A couple of nods followed, hesitant but present. It was easier to dismiss her than to acknowledge that she might be equal or worse, better. Easier to believe there had been a shortcut than to admit someone they'd mocked a moment earlier now stood in possession of a skill they hadn't earned. She stood still, expression unreadable, if she heard them, she gave no sign. Her eyes remained forward, fixed on nothing in particular, as if her mind had wandered somewhere far beyond the sterile hallway and the line of shifting boots. But the whispers kept circling. "You noticed the lipstick, though?" one voice asked. This time, the words carried a sharpness, like a blade pressed against a wound. "It's like she's mocking the uniform. Like she's here to make a point. Or to get attention," another added. The first man smirked. "Well, she got it." A few chuckles rose again, but they sounded thinner now, less sure. It wasn't the full-bodied laughter from earlier, but the nervous kind the sort used to mask unease. They were still trying to figure her out, still deciding if she was a joke or a threat. The truth was, they weren't used to her kind of defiance. Not the loud kind, the shouting, chest-pounding bravado that could be met with equal force. The quiet kind. The kind that refused to bend, that absorbed ridicule without giving anything back. That silence was unnerving, especially among men trained to detect weakness. She finally shifted, just slightly, enough for her boot to scrape the floor. The sound drew eyes like a spark in a dark room. She clasped her hands behind her back, spine straightening a fraction. Her face remained calm, almost serene, but in her stillness there was an unmistakable message. She was not here to prove anything to them. That, perhaps, was what unsettled them most. If she had tried to defend herself, if she had snapped back with some clever retort, they could have dismissed her as defensive, insecure, compensating. If she had ignored them completely, they could have dismissed her as weak. But she did neither. Instead, she simply existed with a certainty that required no validation. And certainty was dangerous. The older SEAL with the scar across his temple, the one who had studied her carefully earlier, finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of authority that came not from rank, but from presence. "Elite marksman patches don't get handed out," he said flatly. The whispering faltered. Heads turned toward him. He didn't elaborate, didn't defend her beyond that single statement. He just let the words fall, heavy as stones, and then returned his gaze forward. The line shifted again, boots scraping on concrete as paperwork was checked at the front. The woman took a step forward with the others, her movement smooth, unhurried, as though she hadn't noticed the man's defense or the whispers it silenced. But she had. She felt the eyes still on her, the weight of judgment mixed with curiosity. And behind it all, the thin thread of doubt that clung stubbornly to the air. She had lived with that doubt for years through training, through missions, through every moment she'd stepped into spaces where no one expected her to succeed. Doubt had become an old companion, one she no longer fought against but carried. With her, knowing it always preceded respect. It was never about silencing the whispers. It was about outlasting them. The SEALs didn't know that yet. They didn't know the long nights she had spent on the range, the burn in her arms as she steadied a rifle through exhaustion, the blistered hands that had bled onto steel. They didn't know about the first time an instructor had told her she didn't belong, or the 100 times she had quietly proved him wrong. They didn't know about the missions where her calm breath and steady aim had shifted the outcome. For an entire team, all they knew was lipstick and a patch. And for now, that was enough for their doubt to linger. The younger recruit leaned forward again, stubborn. "Bet she can't keep up in the field," he whispered, though the words sounded weaker now, like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. The man beside him didn't answer. He just shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking to the woman's patch, and then back to the floor. Doubt had turned inward, and she still hadn't said a word. The line inched forward again, the hum of activity growing louder as they approached the checkpoint. Orders barked, papers shuffled, the scent of coffee drifted faintly from somewhere. Down the hall, Yet in the middle of it all, the tension between them held steady, thick, and unspoken. The whispers hadn't broken her. They hadn't even touched her. But they had exposed something else, something the seals themselves weren't ready to admit, their own insecurity. Because if she was everything that Patch said she was, then what excuse did they have for not being the same? The line crept forward, slow and mechanical, each step punctuated by the scrape of boots against concrete and the shuffle of papers at the checkpoint ahead. Men adjusted their packs, rolled their shoulders, cracked their necks. On the surface, it looked like any other morning at the Navy facility routine, structured, disciplined. But beneath that surface, the air was wired tight, charged with something unsaid. It centered around her. She stood as she had from the beginning, composed, still, unbothered by the storm of stares and whispers around her. Every time the line moved, she followed with the same precise step, measured but unhurried. The lipstick still burned like a quiet rebellion against the sea of hardened faces, a slash of color that refused to blend in. But the lipstick wasn't what held their attention now. One of the younger SEALs, restless and itching for something to say, shifted again. He'd been the loudest in his mockery earlier, eager to impress with his jokes, eager to prove his place in the group. His smirk hadn't faded entirely, but now it looked forced, like a mask that didn't quite fit anymore. His gaze slid to her sleeve, then froze. "Wait," he muttered, his voice cracking in the middle. The man beside him frowned. What? Her patch. The word hit harder than the whisper itself. Patches mattered here. They weren't decorations. They weren't meaningless fabric stitched for show. They were currency earned through sweat, blood, and skill. The second man followed his gaze. His eyes widened, the dismissive grin vanishing as if it had been erased. For a second, he didn't believe what he was reading. He squinted, leaned forward slightly, as if the letters might change if he looked harder. But they didn't. The word was the same every time. Bold, sharp, stitched in dark thread that stood out against the uniform. Elite marksman. The silence. Spread like a wave. The younger SEAL's whisper had caught the attention of others, who now glanced over, curious. And when they saw it, they too fell quiet, their expressions shifting from amusement to something else entirely. Recognition. It was a rare designation, one not given lightly. To carry that patch meant you weren't just good with a weapon, you were among the best. It meant you could make the impossible shot, not once, not by luck, but again and again, under conditions that broke lesser marksmen. The SEALs who had spent years on ranges, who had sweated over their rifles, and cursed at targets that refused to fall, knew exactly what kind of discipline it took to earn that badge. And more importantly, they knew how few ever did. A man near. The back of the line cursed under his breath, barely audible. Another let out a low whistle that died halfway, as if caught in his throat. The mockery, the lipstick jokes, the quiet dismissal, all of it, collapsed under the weight of two words. Elite marksman. The woman remained still, eyes forward, as though unaware of the storm she'd just stirred. She didn't need to look at them. The patch spoke louder than she ever could. For the men, the silence became unbearable. One finally broke it, his voice sharp but uncertain. "Could be a mistake," he muttered. No one answered him, because deep down, they all knew it wasn't. The Navy didn't make mistakes with patches like that. You didn't just stumble into one. You earned it, shot after shot, test after test, until there was no question left about your skill. The instructors who awarded it didn't care about gender, appearance, or personality. They cared about results. And results didn't lie. Another voice, quieter this time. "You know what it takes to even qualify for that?" Heads nodded slowly, reluctantly. They did know. That's why the silence felt so heavy. One man, older, seasoned, finally spoke up. His voice was calm, even, but it carried weight. That patch means she outshot half the people who ever tried. Maybe more. You don't wear it unless you've proven it again and again and again. No one laughed this time. Instead, eyes dropped, shifting uneasily. A few stared at the ground. A few studied her more closely, trying to reconcile the image before them with the reality they now had to accept. The lipstick had been easy to mock. The silence had been easy to dismiss. But the patch? The patch wasn't negotiable. The young Seal, who had been the loudest critic earlier, felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something, anything, to claw back control of the situation. But his words caught in his throat. The patch stripped him of his power, left him exposed. He couldn't laugh her off anymore, not without sounding like a fool. And she hadn't said a word. That was the part that gnawed at them most. She hadn't defended herself. She hadn't explained, argued, or tried to prove her worth. She had simply stood there, calm and steady, and let the truth of her uniform do the talking. The older Seal with the scar across his temple glanced at her again. For the first time, his smirk was gone. What replaced it was something closer to respect, though he didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. In their world, respect wasn't given easily, but it was undeniable once earned. The line moved forward again. Papers shuffled, orders were called, but no one spoke now. The silence was thick, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. When her turn at the checkpoint came, she stepped forward with the same calm precision as before. Her boots struck the concrete evenly, her hands steady as she presented her papers. The officer on duty glanced at her patch, then at her face, and gave a small nod. Routine, automatic, as though he'd seen it before, as though it wasn't remarkable at all. But behind her, the Seals stood in silence, watching. The lipstick still lingered, a quiet reminder of her defiance, but now it was secondary. What they saw first was the patch. And once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. It was no longer a question of whether she belonged. The question now was how many of them could ever hope to match her. For most, a patch was just fabric thread stitched into a uniform. The kind of thing that could be overlooked unless you knew what it meant. But for her, that small square of cloth was the story of her life. Every fiber of it was woven with the nights she had bled, the mornings she had refused to quit, and the days when the weight of doubt threatened to crush her. The whispers in the line had triggered old echoes. She'd heard them before. You're not built for this. She won't last a week. Too slow, too soft, wrong place. The words had followed her through every stage of her journey. But every time they came, she carried them to the range, to the drills, to the endless hours spent proving not to others, but to herself, that she could endure. Her journey had begun long before she ever stepped onto the SEAL base. Back then, she was just a cadet, one face among many, anonymous in the sea of recruits who all thought they could handle the grind. Training had been merciless. Instructors shouted until their voices cracked, and still the drills continued. Mud-caked uniforms, saltwater-burned skin, and fatigue weighed like an anchor pulling everyone toward failure. But on the range, she came alive. The first time she shouldered a rifle, it felt different. Others fought with their weapons, struggling against recoil, frustrated by missed shots. But she treated the rifle like an extension of herself, steady, calm, patient. Her instructors noticed quickly. While others pulled triggers in bursts of panic, she waited, breathing in rhythm, squeezing at the perfect second when stillness was absolute. The targets fell, again and again. What started as whispers of doubt from peers soon turned into whispers of something else. She doesn't miss. But skill wasn't enough. The Navy didn't care about talent alone. It cared about resilience. And resilience wasn't forged in comfort. There were nights she slept in mud so thick it clung to her hair for days. Days when she crawled through sand with the sun scorching overhead until her elbows bled. Times when her hands blistered, skin peeling from gripping rifles for hours in relentless drills. And still, when exhaustion blurred her vision, she forced herself to aim again. One more shot, one more perfect strike. She remembered one test. Vividly, the one that nearly broke her. The instructors had pushed them to the edge with a 20-mile march under heavy packs. When they finally reached the range, dehydrated and shaking from fatigue, the order came. Hit every target. Miss once and you fail. The men around her stumbled, their shots wide, their frustration spilling into curses. She dropped to her knee, the rifle heavy in her hands. Sweat stung her eyes. Her arms trembled, the world tilted with exhaustion. But she closed her eyes, inhaled once, and let the chaos fall away. When she opened them again, all she saw was the target. Her shots rang out, steady and precise. One by one, the targets fell, as if the bullets were drawn by invisible strings. By the end, her body threatened to collapse, but she stood tall. She had passed. It wasn't the last trial. There were dozens more tests of endurance, accuracy, and composure under impossible conditions. Firing from helicopters, shooting in darkness with only seconds to adjust, making split-second decisions in environments designed to break focus. Each time she delivered. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but always with improvement, always with a steadiness that set her apart. Her instructors stopped doubting. Her peers stopped whispering. And eventually, the day came when she was pulled aside, handed the patch that read Elite Marksman. It wasn't given with fanfare. No applause, no speeches. Just a quiet acknowledgement from a commander who handed it to her with a nod. "You earned this," he'd said. She remembered the weight of it in her palm, how something so small could feel heavier than all the gear she'd ever carried. She stitched it onto her uniform herself, each loop of thread a reminder that no one could take it away. But the patch wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Because the real proving ground wasn't the range. It was combat. Her first deployment was chaos, an operation in a hostile zone where every alley hid danger and every rooftop threatened death. The team moved through the night like shadows, hearts pounding, nerves razor-sharp. When the firefight erupted, it was deafening. Bullets tore through the air, sparks lit the dark, and orders shouted over the coms barely cut through the noise. And then came the call. A target, hidden at distance, pinning her team down with relentless fire. She found her position, belly pressed against the dirt, rifle cradled steady. The world narrowed again, the chaos muted, the fear silenced, until all she saw was the target. One shot, then another, then silence. Her team moved forward. Lives saved, not by chance, but by her skill. That night, the whispers changed. Doubt faded. Respect, reluctant at first, began to replace it. And now, standing in line with the SEALs who had mocked her lipstick, those memories burned behind. Her calm eyes. The patch on her sleeve wasn't just fabric. It was the sum of all those nights, all those trials, all those battles where her breath had steadied, her aim had held true, and her resolve had refused to break. The men didn't know her story, not yet, but they saw the patch, and for the first time, they began to understand. A battlefield never looked the same twice. Sometimes it was dust choking the air, turning the horizon into a smear of brown and red. Other times it was the endless black of a desert night, where shadows moved like ghosts and silence carried the weight of a storm. For her, the battlefield was not a place, but a state of being one, that stripped away illusion and left only truth. And the truth was simple. You either performed or you died. It was during her second deployment that she truly earned the respect stitched into her patch. The mission was routine on paper. Secure a hostile compound on the outskirts of a desert. Village suspected of housing insurgents and weapons. But anyone who'd been downrange knew there was no such thing as routine. The team inserted under cover of darkness, the rhythmic thump of the helicopter's rotors, their only soundtrack as they descended into enemy territory. Dust whipped through the air as they disembarked, boots sinking into the grit of foreign soil. The SEALs moved with practiced precision, weapons raised, eyes scanning, their formation a fluid dance of discipline. She moved with them, silent, her rifle cradled against her chest. The whispers from weeks earlier, the mockery about her lipstick, the doubts about her patch echoed faintly in her mind. But here, in the field, whispers didn't matter. Bullets did. The village was eerily quiet as they approached. Windows were dark, doors bolted. The silence felt wrong. Too still, too staged. Her gut tightened. The first shots cracked through. A night like whiplash. The compound erupted in fire, muzzle flashes sparking from rooftops and alleyways. The air filled with the shriek of bullets cutting close, the thud of rounds slamming into walls, the sharp shouts of orders over comms. The team dove for cover. She slid behind a crumbled wall, grit biting into her palms as she steadied her breathing. Around her, the SEALs returned fire, bursts of controlled chaos meant to suppress while they regrouped. Sniper. Someone yelled over comms. The voice was right. She'd seen it too. A glint on the rooftop, the telltale shimmer of a scope catching the faintest light. Whoever was up there had the high ground and a clear line on their position. If he wasn't neutralized, they wouldn't make it out. Her pulse slowed. She shifted her rifle, nestling the butt into her shoulder, cheek pressed firmly against the stock. Her world narrowed to the scope, everything else dissolving into background noise. Bullets still tore through the night. Shouts echoed. Dust filled her lungs. But she was somewhere else now, a place of absolute stillness. There, she found him prone against the rooftop, scope glinting again as he scanned for his next shot. Her finger brushed the trigger. She inhaled, exhaled, let the air leave her lungs until there was nothing left but quiet. The crack of her rifle split the night. The glint vanished. One heartbeat later, the enemy sniper's body slumped forward. Lifeless. Target down, she said calmly into comms, her voice steady. Around her, the SEALs shifted. Some exhaled in relief. Others glanced toward her. Though she didn't see it, her eye was still on the scope, searching for the next threat. But the tone had changed. It wasn't disbelief anymore. It was trust. The firefight raged on. Insurgents poured from alleyways, rifles spitting fire. The SEALs pressed forward, their movements controlled but strained under the pressure of the ambush. She advanced with them, every step measured, every glance scanning rooftops and windows. Each time a target revealed itself, her rifle cracked and the threat dissolved. At one point, a SEAL in front of her stumbled as rounds peppered the wall near his head. Without hesitation, she dropped to a knee, sighted in, and eliminated the shooter before the man had even caught his breath. He looked back at her then, eyes wide not with doubt, but gratitude. The battle stretched into what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. By the time the last shots faded, the compound was secure, insurgents neutralized, weapons stockpiled and accounted for. The SEALs gathered in the center, sweat streaking through dirt on their faces, their breaths ragged. She approached last, her rifle still steady in her grip. Her uniform was dusted with grit, her lipstick long since faded, but the patch on her sleeve caught the glow of their flashlights. No one mocked it now. One of the men, the same young recruit who had smirked in line weeks earlier, stepped toward her. His chest still rose and fell with adrenaline, his voice rough when he spoke. "You saved my life," he admitted. She gave a small nod. We saved each other. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't even a statement of pride. It was truth. From that night on, the whispers changed. No one questioned her presence anymore. No one laughed at the lipstick or dismissed the patch. Because in the fire of combat, she had proven what many of them hadn't wanted to believe. She was not just equal, she was essential. Later, around the glow of dim lights back at base, the men swapped stories, the way soldiers always did, half serious, half to release the tension of what they'd survived. This time, her name was in those stories, her precision immortalized. In their retelling, she dropped him in one shot, one said, shaking his head. Didn't even flinch, another added. Cool as ice. Saved us all. She sat quietly in the corner, sipping water, letting the words wash over her. She didn't need their praise, but she let them have it. Respect wasn't about applause, it was about trust. And that she had earned. From then on, when she walked into a line of SEALs, the air didn't shift with mockery. It shifted with acknowledgement. They didn't just see her patch anymore. They saw the woman who had stood in the dirt beside them, who had kept her aim true when chaos reigned, who had steadied their path forward with every shot she fired. The battlefield had tested her, as it always did. And once again, she had not been found wanting. Respect in the military was never given freely. It wasn't something you could demand, or wear like a badge, or win with a clever word. Respect was built in moments of fire moments, when your actions spoke louder than the noise, when you proved yourself in the rawest, most unforgiving environments. She had done just that in the desert ambush, but respect, once sparked, still had to grow. The change began subtly. When she walked into the mess hall the morning after the mission, the air was different. The day before, she had felt the stares follow her, some mocking, some skeptical, some simply dismissive. Now, those same eyes lingered for a different reason. The smirks were gone, replaced by nods, brief acknowledgments, quiet gestures that spoke louder than words. A SEAL at the far end of the table stood as she passed and offered her a spot beside him. It wasn't much, but in a world where camaraderie was earned meal by meal, mission by mission, it was everything. She sat, quiet but present, her patch catching the fluorescent light. No one mentioned lipstick. No one joked about her presence. Instead, they asked about the shot she'd taken on the sniper. "How'd you see him?" One asked, leaning forward, curiosity genuine. "Instinct," she replied simply. He shook his head. Hell of an instinct. The conversation didn't turn into a celebration. SEALs didn't operate that way. They didn't pile on praise or inflate egos. But the questions themselves, the curiosity, the respect laced through their tone, meant more than applause, ever could. Her days became easier, not because the training lessened, but because the walls around her began to lower. Where before there had been silence or half-muttered comments, now there were conversations. On runs, they matched her pace instead of sprinting ahead. On the range, they asked for tips, sometimes joking, sometimes serious, but always with a layer of acknowledgement. One night during downtime, a young SEAL trainee approached her while she was cleaning her rifle. He hesitated, then sat across from her, the weapon in his own hands half disassembled. "You're faster at this," he admitted. She looked up, arching a brow. "Faster doesn't mean better." "Still?" he said with a shrug. "Teach me?" The request caught her off guard, but she nodded. The two worked in silence for a while, her hands guiding his, showing him tricks she had learned the hard way, how to check for wear, how to streamline the cleaning process, how to treat the rifle less like a tool and more like a partner. By the time he reassembled it, the lines between teacher and student had blurred. He looked at her, eyes no longer skeptical, but steady with admiration. "Thanks," he said simply. She only nodded, but something shifted inside her. Respect wasn't just about proving yourself once. It was about consistency, about showing again and again that you belonged. It wasn't only in training or downtime that respect grew. It was in the smallest moments, in the instincts that separated survival from disaster. During one drill, the team was tasked with breaching a mock compound. The scenario was meant to test reflexes under pressure, the instructors setting traps and unpredictable threats. As they stacked up against the door, a SEAL at the front reached for the handle. Her eyes caught a subtle glint near the hinge, barely visible, but enough. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back just as the mock explosive detonated, a controlled blast that would have taken him out of the drill. He spun, startled, but when he saw the smoldering hinge, realization hit. He gave her a long look before muttering, "You just saved my ass." The words spread quickly, as they always did. By the end of the day, the story had circulated through the barracks. And though no one said it outright, the message was clear. She wasn't just skilled. She was reliable. But the most telling sign came during another deployment months later. The team had been tasked with securing a convoy route through mountainous terrain, notorious for ambushes. The mission dragged on longer than expected. The sun beating down, packs weighing heavier with each step. Tension crackled in the air. Everyone knew an attack could come at any moment. When it did, it was sudden and brutal. Gunfire erupted from the ridgelines, rounds raining down like hail. The team dove for cover, scrambling for position. Amid the chaos, she found her vantage point on a rocky outcrop. From there, her rifle spoke, each shot precise, deliberate. The insurgents' advantage crumbled under her accuracy, their fire faltering as she picked them off one by one. As SEALs pressed forward, their movements sharper, bolder, fueled by the certainty that someone had their backs. They trusted her, fully. By the time the firefight ended, dust and smoke clinging to the air, the team gathered to regroup. This time, no one hesitated. A SEAL slapped her shoulder. Another bumped fists. A third muttered, "Damn fine shooting." There was no skepticism left, only solidarity. The transformation was complete in ways both visible and subtle. In training, they asked her advice without hesitation. In missions, they trusted her word without doubt. In downtime, they shared stories, jokes, even silence, as brothers and sisters in arms did. She had become one of them, not because she tried to be, but because she had never wavered in being herself. The lipstick she wore on the first day, once mocked, was now just another part of her identity, quirky, maybe, but respected. Patch on her sleeve was no longer a curiosity, but a reminder, to them and to herself, of the fire she had walked through to earn her place. One evening, after weeks of back-to-back drills, she found herself on the range with a small group. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Targets stood lined in the distance, shadows stretching long across the sand. "Bet you can't clear them all in under 30 seconds, one SEAL joked, grinning. She smirked, loading her rifle. "Watch me." The timer beeped, and she moved like water, her shots sharp and unerring. One after another, the targets fell, until silence reclaimed the range. She lowered the rifle, turning to see their faces, a mixture of awe, amusement, and respect. "You're insane," one muttered. "You're elite," another corrected. For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. Respect wasn't about approval. It wasn't about blending in. It was about standing firm in the fire until others saw what you already knew, that you belonged. She had walked into their line as an outsider, lipstick a bold stroke against the canvas of conformity, her patch dismissed as novelty. But she had stayed, endured, fought, and bled beside them. And in doing so, she had transformed their perception. Now, when she stood in line among SEALs, the silence wasn't heavy with doubt. It was charged with something stronger, camaraderie, and respect, hard-earned and undeniable. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Respect had opened a door, but acceptance required time, shared experiences, and the proving of character, not just in skill, but in humanity. In the days following the desert ambush and the mountain convoy, she began to feel it a subtle shift in the air. She was no longer a curiosity to be measured or a challenge to their assumptions. She was part of the team. It started in small ways. During drills, she was consulted rather than questioned. The men no longer argued with her instructions or questioned her judgment. Instead, they asked, listened, and sometimes even deferred. On the range, they no longer competed for attention. They competed with her, striving to match her precision, rather than mock her style. One evening, the team gathered around a flickering campfire after a long day of field exercises. Exhausted, bruised, and sunburned, they sat in a circle, weapons laid aside, faces streaked with dirt. Conversation flowed, unguarded and raw, the kind that only emerged when men and women trusted each other with their lives. She sat among them, her rifle leaning against a rock, the patch on her sleeve still sharp against the worn fabric of her uniform. The younger SEAL, who had been the loudest critic months ago, approached, holding a thermos of coffee. "Here," he said, offering it to her with a sheepish smile. "Figured you might want one. You saved me more times than I can count." She accepted it without a word, but the nod she gave him carried more weight than any speech could. It wasn't about pride. It was acknowledgement, recognition, that trust was mutual. Another SEAL, a seasoned veteran with years of deployments behind him, leaned back on his elbows, studying her quietly. "You're different," he said, almost to himself. She raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Not in skill, not in patch. You're steady. You don't break under pressure. And you don't need to prove yourself anymore. You just are." His words hung in the firelight, honest and unpolished, yet heavy with truth. In their world, few compliments were given lightly. She felt a warmth she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. The deeper bond emerged not through formal exercises or accolades, but in shared struggles. The next week, during a grueling night navigation drill, the team was forced to traverse miles of rough terrain under darkness with minimal equipment. Fatigue set in early, muscles screaming, minds fogged by exhaustion. She led the way quietly, recalculating routes and spotting hidden obstacles before anyone else could see them. At one point, a younger SEAL slipped on loose gravel and nearly tumbled down a slope. She reached out instinctively, catching his arm, steadying him without a word. Later, when the teen paused to rest, the same young SEAL leaned toward her. "I don't know how you do it," he admitted, voice low. "I would have fallen or panicked, maybe both." She only smiled faintly. "You didn't. That's what counts." The relief in his expression, the trust in his gaze, reflected something deeper than admiration. It was the beginning of acceptance. The SEALs no longer questioned her presence. They relied on it. Another defining moment came during a live fire. Drill designed to simulate a hostage rescue in an urban environment. The buildings were mock structures, but the chaos was real. Smoke, shouting, and timed explosions filled the air, forcing the team to make split-second decisions under pressure. As they approached the building, one of the SEALs froze momentarily, caught off guard by simulated gunfire and smoke. Without hesitation, she placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him, and cleared a path. Together, They moved forward, coordinated as if they had practiced this routine for years. Afterwards, as they regrouped, another seal who had been quiet for weeks spoke up. "She's got our backs, always." The team exchanged glances, nodding silently. No one needed to say more. They had seen it, experienced, lived it. Respect had evolved into trust. Trust had evolved into something far more human, the beginning of brotherhood. Camaraderie, however, also demanded vulnerability. In the quiet moments between missions, they shared stories personal, sometimes painful, sometimes humorous things they rarely revealed outside the group. She listened at first, the wall of her past still intact, letting them talk, letting them reveal the layers of themselves. Slowly, she began to share too. Not her victories, not her precision or accolades, but small stories from training, the nights spent alone on the range, the mistakes she had made, the fear she had felt the first time live rounds fired near her. "You ever scared?" a seal asked one evening, the orange firelight flickering across his face. She paused, considering. "Of course," she said finally, "but fear is just information. You feel it, acknowledge it, and you let it guide your decisions instead of freezing you." The young seal across from her nodded. "Makes sense." "You make it look easier." "It's not easier," she replied. "You just survive long enough to understand it." Her honesty shifted the dynamic. No longer was she an untouchable figure defined by skill alone. She became one of them, a teammate, a comrade, a peer. The patch still carried weight, but now it was augmented by the shared human experience of trust and understanding. The pinnacle of their acceptance came during a week-long field exercise in extreme terrain. The team was exhausted, morale low, and minor mistakes amplified by the harsh conditions. Water was scarce, food rations limited, and sleep nearly impossible. One night, as they huddled around a small fire for warmth, a SEAL spoke up. "You know," he began carefully, "when you first walked in, we didn't think you belonged." Heads nodded in agreement, some sheepish, some honest. Her eyes met his, calm. "I know," she said softly. "I didn't come here to prove anything to you. I came to do the job." The man shifted. "We get it now," he said, "and I think we'd follow you anywhere." The statement wasn't just respect. It was acknowledgement of equality, trust, and reliance. It was a declaration that she had earned a place not by demanding it, not by arguing, but by standing steadfast, performing when it mattered, and being human when it counted most. From that point forward, the lines of distinction blurred. During missions, the SEALs moved as a single unit, instinctively coordinating with her, covering angles, trusting her judgment. During downtime, they joked, teased, and shared meals as they would with a sibling, comfortable in the unspoken understanding that each of them had risked their lives together. The young recruit, who had once mocked her lipstick, now sought her guidance on marksmanship, strategy, and handling stress under fire. The older SEALs included her in conversations she would have once only observed, asking for her insights, listening to her ideas with genuine interest. Even her lipstick once, a mark of audacity, became a symbol of identity, recognized but unremarkable. She didn't wear it to mock or challenge. It was a quiet declaration of self, integrated into a team that valued her not despite it, but as part of who she was. By the end of the exercise, there was no pretense, no distance. She was one of them. Her patch had earned her respect, her actions had cemented trust, and her presence had fostered genuine acceptance. Brotherhood wasn't about sameness. It was about reliance, shared danger, and recognition of skill and character. And she had proven herself worthy on all counts. As they sat together in the final night around a small dying fire, the SEALs joked and laughed, the weight of exhaustion softened by camaraderie. She joined in, not to entertain, not to prove herself, but to connect. The stories shared that night tales of failures, near-death experiences, and absurd moments of humor wove her into their fabric permanently. For the first time, she felt the profound truth of belonging, not because she had demanded it, not because she had sought approval, but because she had endured, contributed, and shown herself to be trustworthy, capable, and human. The patch on her sleeve was no longer a mark to be questioned. It was a reminder to everyone present herself, included, that skill, courage, and humanity together earned not just respect, but acceptance and brotherhood. The patch on her sleeve had always been more than a piece of fabric. In training, it had been a symbol of mastery, a quiet proclamation of skill honed through countless hours of practice, discipline, and sacrifice. In combat, it had been a lifeline, a marker that others relied on when survival depended on precision and steadiness under pressure. And in the weeks and months that followed, it had become something else, entirely a legacy. By now, she was no longer the woman who had walked into the line with lipstick and a defiant air. She had become inseparable from the team, a respected peer, a trusted leader in the making, and an embodiment of everything the SEALs valued: courage, skill, and unshakable composure under fire. The recognition didn't come in ceremonies or applause. It came quietly, in the moments when lives hung in balance, in the shared glances between teammates, and in the mutual reliance that had grown so naturally it was invisible. It was during one particularly grueling mission, deep in the mountains, that the full measure of her legacy became undeniable. The SEALs had been tasked with securing a strategic supply route in a hostile region. The operation was straightforward, in theory, but terrain, weather, and hidden insurgent activity made every step a test of nerve, endurance, and skill. From the moment the team deployed, she moved with confidence. Her eyes scanned ridges, rooftops, and alleys for threats. Her mind calculated angles, wind patterns, and potential lines of fire with precision that had saved them more times than anyone could count. And the patch on her sleeve was there, visible and unobtrusive, a reminder that she had earned her place through action, not ambition. The firefight came sooner than expected. Ambushes erupted from multiple directions, rounds tearing through, the air like deadly rain. The younger SEALs froze momentarily, caught in the chaos, unsure of the best path forward. But she did not hesitate. Her movements were smooth and decisive, a living demonstration of training and experience fused with instinct. She covered her teammates, took precise shots to neutralize threats, and called out positions and strategies over combs, guiding the team through the chaos. One young SEAL, the same one who had doubted her in the beginning, looked at her in awe, as she moved from position to position, never missing a beat. She's unreal," he muttered under his breath. When the firefight finally ended, the team emerged shaken but intact. No one had been lost, and the mission objectives had been achieved. The veterans exchanged glances, nodding in quiet approval, and even the most skeptical among them now acknowledged what had been undeniable for months. She was more than capable. She was indispensable. Back at base, life returned to its regular rhythm drills, briefings, and the never-ending grind of training. Yet the dynamics had shifted completely. The SEALs no longer measured her by appearance or novelty. They consulted her on strategy, sought her opinion on technical matters, and often deferred to her judgment in high-pressure situations. Her presence had become a stabilizing factor, a constant in the unpredictable world of special operations. New recruits noticed the change immediately. They saw how the team respected her, how they sought her input and relied on her in ways they hadn't with anyone else. The patch, once a mark of individual achievement, now carried a deeper meaning. It symbolized earned authority, reliability, and the kind of competence that inspired loyalty. And she understood that legacy was not just about the patch or the skill, it was about the impact on others. Every recruit who looked at her with initial skepticism, every SEAL who had questioned her presence, and every teammate who had relied on her instinctively was now part of a living testament to what discipline, perseverance, and courage could achieve. One evening, during a rare quiet moment, she found herself alone on the deck overlooking the water. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and pink, and the hum of the bass below was soft, almost peaceful. She traced the outline of her patch, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. The first time she had worn it, it had been a private victory, earned quietly after months of grueling training. At first, it had felt like an anomaly, a small symbol against the constant scrutiny of peers who doubted her. But over time, that small square of fabric had become a cornerstone of identity, not only hers, but the team's. It wasn't vanity, nor was it ego. It was proof of mastery. Yes, but more importantly, it was proof that actions mattered more than assumptions. That courage mattered more than conformity. That perseverance mattered more than appearances. Her reflection in the fading light wasn't interrupted for long. Soon, the younger SEALs approached, quiet and tentative. The one who had doubted her so many months ago now smiled with genuine warmth. "Hey," he said, "we're heading out for night drills. Thought you'd want to come." She nodded, rising gracefully. As she walked with them toward the training field, she realized that the bond between them had deepened far beyond professional respect. It was familial, formed in the crucible of hardship, tempered in fire, and sealed by shared experiences that would last a lifetime. They trained together, laughed together, and sometimes, in rare moments, shared fears and stories that had no place outside their circle. She was no longer just a marksman or a decorated soldier. She was a teammate, a mentor, a role model, and most importantly, a trusted part of their extended family. The following months saw new recruits arrive. As they stood in line, uncertain, wide-eyed, and questioning, the SEALs who had once doubted her watched them differently. She took it upon herself to guide them, quietly and firmly. She taught them the importance of patience, discipline, and focus. She showed them the consequences of hesitation and the rewards of preparation. And in doing so, she passed on more than skill. She passed on the essence of what it meant to earn respect, trust, and ultimately, acceptance. The patch on her sleeve became a symbol not only of her achievements, but of the journey she had taken to create an environment where others could rise. Recruits looked at her and understood this wasn't just a badge of honor. It was a story stitched into fabric, a story of grit, courage, and unyielding dedication. Years later, when new generations of SEALs joined the ranks, her legacy remained. Veterans told stories of the woman who walked into line with lipstick and a patch, defying expectation, earning respect in silence, and proving herself in fire. They recounted how she had saved lives, steadied nerves, and fostered camaraderie that transcended gender, background, or initial judgment. Her name became synonymous with quiet excellence, her story a benchmark for newcomers. The patch, while earned by her alone, became a metaphor, reminder to every recruit that skill, perseverance, and character mattered more than appearances or preconceptions. Even long after she moved on to new assignments, her influence lingered. SEALs trained differently, supported each other more consciously, and welcomed outsiders with the understanding that excellence could come from anywhere and that true respect was earned, never assumed. She often reflected on her journey quietly, far from the spotlight. The lipstick that had once sparked ridicule, the patch that had provoked skepticism, the missions that had tested her every nerve, each had contributed to the legacy she left behind. She had entered a world that doubted her, and she had walked through fire, not just surviving, but transforming the environment around her. And in doing so, she had shown that legacy was not about being remembered in accolades or medals. It was about changing perceptions, inspiring others, and leaving a mark that endured far beyond one life or one mission. The patch was more than a badge. It was proof that courage, skill, and perseverance created ripples that could change the culture around her. And every time she saw a new recruit studying it, eyes wide with admiration or skepticism, she knew that the story was continuing. Her journey was not about proving herself to others. It was about living the truth of her skill and character, letting her actions speak, and trusting that time and circumstance would cement her legacy. And it had. The SEALs who once mocked her had become her brothers and sisters in arms. The team she had quietly guided had grown stronger because of her influence. And the patch, once a mark of personal achievement, had become a symbol of possibility proof that anyone who refused to give in to doubt, who faced adversity with skill and resilience, could leave a mark that endured. As she stood on the deck one last time before departing for her next mission, the patch on her sleeve caught the morning sun. She traced it with a finger, not out of pride, but in quiet acknowledgement of the journey it represented. And somewhere, in the distance, the SEALs she had trained, fought, and lived alongside looked on, understanding without words that her legacy would never fade.